Good morning, Mitch, and thank you for joining me today on the Climate Tech Product Show. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Leo. Really glad to be here. I always enjoy our conversations. So thank you very much for the invite.
Likewise. So Mitch, you, unlike a few other people that I've had on the show so far, have had a ton of climate tech experience, a ton as big as a ton can be in the climate tech space, in an emerging space. I remember when we first met, you told me about how in Singapore, and sort of, I think you referred to it as like climate tech 1.0 or something along those lines. You've been in this space for a little bit longer than I guess the average founder in this space. So really keen to understand a little bit about your experience and sort of where this passion has come from and what you have done in this space.
Yeah, sure. So actually it was Green Tech 1.0 back when it was, everything was green. And what I was doing there is trading biodiesel actually. So we set up and established the largest biodiesel trading desk globally, and was based in Geneva at that time actually. And what really interested me about that space, we were moving physical products, trading financial products on the back of that as well, so swaps and derivatives, etc. But what I always found really interesting is like the things that we could be doing otherwise to improve that market. And that was like the really exciting thing in that space at that time was new feedstock. So there was this feedstock jatropha that was going to be grown all along railway lines throughout India and then shipped around the world. Of course, that sort of fell over and failed. And then there was going to be algae, we're going to be producing biofuels from algae, and that couldn't scale. So there are a lot of learnings from sort of that Green Tech 1.0 evolution. And so much has changed since then, this mantra around electrify everything, decarbonization of energy rather than replacing fossil fuels with drop-in fuels. I mean, since that was 2000s, this space is changing so quickly, so rapidly. And since my journey started, it's evolved many times over.
Awesome. And what brought you, because after Geneva, you then went to Singapore, and then after Singapore, you've come here, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So London before Geneva, Singapore. And it's been really a career progression through really large trading houses. These companies turn over, a few $100 billion a year, but no one tends to really hear of them. And I've gone, through the energy journey, mostly focused on renewables, developing, decentralized generation. So solar plus battery throughout Africa, Central America, etc. But really, it's sort of the financialization of energy trading and products that's been sort of the center of my career.
Amazing. Okay. And then fast forward 2020, I think you mentioned, Katalyst Earth comes about.
Yeah, well, actually, it's far more recent than that. So we are kind of like, one of those classic COVID symptoms of what do you really want to do? And I'd always wanted to do my own thing, and it sort of just felt right that, at the time then. And I'd always thought that, it was better to have a lot of experience, to gain a lot of expertise in an area and then go build something. And having started down this journey, I can absolutely tell you maybe that's not the right way to go. When you get a little bit older, you've got kids and other responsibilities you need to take care of as well. It does add extra challenges. And it's a very humbling situation to be in, from going from this sort of corporate, like lot of responsibility, global teams, investing tens, hundreds of millions of dollars here and there, running trading books that are, turning over $1 billion plus every year, to kind of like starting all over again and trying to build something that's really innovative. You're at scratch. And, I kind of wish I was doing it when I was 20 years old.
Yeah. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. Okay. And tell us a little bit about Katalyst Earth. What is Katalyst Earth? What is your one-liner, your elevator pitch for Katalyst Earth?
That evolves every day, right? So
always.
We know what we want to do. We know the problems that we want to solve, but how we're pitching it is something at this early stage that we're still trying to learn. And we're learning how we sell that to customers, to investors or prospective investors, to developers, project developers that we're working with upstream, which I can explain a little bit more. But if I can go into the sort of the latest one-liner, we want to be a single click regeneration marketplace. So what we're trying to do is make those environmental markets, so carbon markets, for example, as self-serve as possible. Today, they're really complicated, really opaque. We've talked about this. You've done some work around that. Consumers don't really get it. Businesses don't really get it. It's a very intangible thing, carbon, for example. Project developers struggle meeting all the methodologies, etc. There's a way for us to really automate that. Like a methodology is a rules-based, it's a set of rules, essentially. That can be automated, and we can digitize MRV, and we can create more customer engagement by providing better platforms for businesses, for brands, that they can speak to their customers around the impact that they're having. So we're really bookending sort of this carbon market, and we're focused on nature positive
and
projects.
your market, I guess, or your customers, you're creating a marketplace, as you said. So you've got multiple customers. You've got at least two. So one is on the supply side, one is on the demand side. So on the supply side, is it directly the farmers? Is it the project developers? Is it the massive sort of landowners? Like, who would you say is on that side of the equation?
So exclude the massive landowners. They're pretty well taken care of with these complex methodologies, and there's project developers that are out there willing to work with them, okay? We are focused as a beachhead on smaller landowners. So there's 100,000 small Australian farms, small being less than 100 hectares, which is quite big in, international terms of what a farm should be. But those landowners or land stewards, native title, etc., is obviously important as well. Really don't have access to those markets today. They can't be incentivized for the actions that they're taking because their farms are too small. So what often happens, and particularly I see that in the region where I live, that farmers are driven by purpose. They do an environmental planting, for example. They want to go and plant some trees. We're regenerating the big scrub here around Byron Bay. And they'll go and get a project developer who might get some sponsorship and help plant some trees. Corporate might sponsor that. But at the end of the day, there's no real incentive mechanism for them to do that. They're not getting paid to do that. And in fact, it's a massive cost for them. They can't graze cattle.
So implementing the project, the project economics just don't stack up because of the size of the farm?
Yeah. There's no project economics. There's no methodology, et cetera, that caters to them. So
and the amount of carbon that they generate wouldn't be enough to generate the revenue to make it all worthwhile, I guess.
Yeah. And the reason for that is because of all the steps and processes and the complexity in that market. So there is a reason you need high integrity, right? But that's typically been brought about by paying 50 grand to drop an auditor onto some property, and he gets an A4 sheet of paper and sort of checks some boxes. That can be done remotely, digitally. You can bring down that cost very quickly whilst maintaining a high level of integrity. So we're building tools for those project developers. We don't work directly necessarily with landowners, but we're unlocking that for them. So we're building tools that, like our first thing that we've built, allows a project developer to actually plan their project, but what it's really doing is capturing data so that you can actually start building up the model of what will actually the impact that project will have. Okay. And they need to follow a set of rules that will be
that guarantees that quality of the credit that's issued at the other end.
Correct. Exactly.
Right, we could go into all sorts of rabbit holes about this, but okay, that's the supply side. And you've mentioned, we'll touch on that a little bit later around, your beachhead customer and why or how you've chosen that. Now let's talk about the demand side. Because it's not just that, like if taking a step back, as I understand it, you've basically connected the buyers and the sellers of carbon credits, and you've made it, as you said, through your workflow, through your tools, through your technology, you've made that both reduce the cost, perhaps somehow democratize the access to the funding to be able to implement these kinds of projects. But on the buying side of your platform, you have got quite a novel sort of approach as I find it, because you've basically appealing to people who want to do good in the land, perhaps around them, or want to do good to just regenerate Australian land or around the world. So can you talk to us a little bit about who your customers are on the buying end of your marketplace?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to highlight, so at this stage, we don't really have customers. We've got brands and companies that we're working with and piloting at the moment. But our target market at this early stage is really sustainably conscious brands that want to relay something to their consumers. Okay. And if you think about today, carbon markets suit very large corporations, which is great. And there's a lot of corporations that are, buying into these highly complex methodologies, and they require that, they've got a really broad range of stakeholders that they need to appeal to around their transition to net zero. On the other end, you've got this sort of zero verification level of sponsorship, which is really philanthropy. So a business, SME will go out, sponsor some tree planting organization, let's say. It's great work, but there's really no verification around that. There's no way that you can actually store value within that. And that work gets done, but there's no follow-ups. So those organizations are paying once. They might get an Instagram photo or something saying, hey, thanks for your donation. Here's a photo of us planting some trees for your company. Fantastic. But that's really expensive marketing at the end of the day. And I think it's great that those businesses are building that into their business plan. But how do we communicate that more to customers? And how do we create something like a carbon credit that gives a store of value to those brands, to those businesses?
So it's not the traditional offset your flight at the end of the checkout, where all you get is, that's it. You just get the little thing in your invoice that says, hey, you've offset $2.50. But instead of that, you're saying that you can give the consumer and you can give the brand that store of value. You can give them a much better sense of what the hell has been done with the money that they put forward.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And that comes.
And what does that store of value look like? Because this is where we start peeling the onion a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it looks just like a carbon credit. So if you think about like a tree planting project, company A sponsors a tree to get planted. They'll pay anywhere between 15 cents and $5 for that to happen. Okay. And that's it. That happens once. Carbon credits, you buy a credit, right? And then a credit is issued every time there's a verification process. So which, might be annually. And that pays for the ongoing maintenance, operations, et cetera, of that project. Okay. So rather than getting a single payment, you're getting ongoing payments for that project developer or for that landowner. So there's a real incentive mechanism for that switch. So that store of value looks just like a carbon credit for those brands, for those businesses that want to actually do good and want to continue sponsoring, well, not even sponsoring, but continue to promote and invest in these projects. The other thing that we think is like the UI UX throughout this market is so bad. So one of the things that we've built is just a customer dashboard so that a business can show the impact that they're having as well. So what that looks like, I mean, it's on our website, but it looks like, because we're focused on reforestation. So it's number of trees planted, amount of CO2 that's been sequestered, and a few other bits and pieces that we're working through with a couple of brands and companies at the moment that they want to show their customers. That doesn't exist in the carbon market today. You get maybe a slip of paper, a long time afterwards. Yeah. Because it takes months to get it through all the custodial counts with brokers, etc.
Yeah.
It's really around driving that. An end goal for us, Leo, is that you can integrate that within everyday economics. And there's a couple of brands that are really forward looking on this. So what they do at the moment is they say, okay, buy something from us, we'll plant 5 trees, right? Carbon doesn't really come into it. If you create these if you plant 5 trees with us and you can somehow help us prove that you've already done that, there's a reward mechanism for you on your next purchase. So you'll get a discount. What we're trying to do is create, because you've got this store of value, you can pass that all the way through the consumer if a business chooses to do so. So if they're a repeat customer, that can be built into the economics.
Yeah.
So you're creating this flow back into investing in regeneration.
And all the way up to the traceability of the quality of the credit at the other end, right?
100%. That's so
Now,
important.
there's a big beast behind the scenes here. And that's something that I wanted to touch on today. So look, many climate techs have got some pretty hardcore, complicated technology behind the scenes. I've worked with a few startups that really struggled to break out of the fact that they're using something like blockchain, or that they're using some world first biotech method to transform seaweed into something else, right? So it's very easy, because of the technical prowess and the real kind of science sometimes behind some of these innovations. It obviously draws and brings people in the founders that are very technically minded, very science minded. A lot of people come from academia into this space. But what that does and what that produces is when we get into the selling side of a lot of these products, and when we have to convey what the hell these products are, what the value proposition is, when we have to communicate to an investor, or we have to communicate to one of these sustainably minded brands, sometimes it just goes like over their head. Because for the people that aren't in the weeds, that aren't so close to the incredible feats of technology and innovation, they just don't get it. They just don't understand, right? So that's one of the things I wanted to touch on. You is, can you share a little bit about your experience of how do you actually communicate something which is quite complicated to whoever your customer is? Because even if you are speaking to a sustainably minded brand, that doesn't mean that they understand or care to understand even that sort of traceability of the quality of the carbon credit, or, so I just wanted to explore that in a little bit. It's like, how do you break that complexity and tell a story that they actually get?
Yeah,
or how have you kind of gone about it?
It's been a big learning experience for us, actually. We thought the technology was quite important to people, but it's not. Actually, it's really divisive and really confusing. So just to confuse it even more, we're currently building on a hash graph, which isn't even a blockchain. But at the end of the day, it's the technology is a digital ledger, and that's the way that we convey it if people ask. We made a big mistake, I think, to start with, which was we focused very much on the technology and how great that technology could be in solving these problems. And actually what we've learned is that we need to focus on the customer problems, the problems in the marketplace that we're fixing, rather than how the technology is going to solve it.
Hallelujah.
So we have completely buried any reference to anything around blockchain, or we already knew we would never go and speak to a farmer about blockchain. We thought that might be quite appealing to customers, retail customers, etc. So we tested that. We did NFTs and all these sort of things to test how that goes with customers. And actually, there was an interesting article that came out. I haven't read the full report yet, but just got released, I think, this week, the Q3 2022 Voluntary Carbon Market Report. And they did an analysis of how people want to buy carbon credits. And what it showed is that people want direct contact between the producer and the consumer. So a buyer wants to be as close as they can to upstream. They don't want intermediaries, which is one thing that blockchain does solve. But they also don't want to use crypto. So we're making ours, if you want to jump into some of the lingo, really Web 2 friendly. Like, we are not a Web 3 company. We may use a technology that people associate with Web 3, but we're a climate tech company first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
So the big learning for us is everything that's related to that technology needs to be under the hood. And we're working with partners that are helping on that technology that understand that as well.
Amazing. That is such a good insight there and then, because as you said, I've worked with companies that have made that mistake of leading with the tech, because, rightly so. You're proud of the big brains and you're proud of the technical achievement of pulling this thing off. But what do you know? Customers don't really care. I find that happens a lot with emerging tech in general, is that obviously it attracts the tech heads and the people that are, wow, this technology has insane potential. But then people really struggle to find a use case that the emerging tech solves better than whatever alternative they might be. So we're just literally kind of running around trying to find a way to solve a problem with this tech, and it's the wrong way to go about it. Like, the tech should be in support of the problem. not the other way around,
yeah,
right?
we always felt that we always recognized that, like, we were using the technology because it was applicable to a problem we were trying to solve. But our problem was that we kept on being drawn into conversations around, that's what people wanted to talk about. That's what they found interesting. So we would have, just meetings with a VC or something, and there'd be some mention of blockchain, and then straight away they want to latch onto that. Straight away, like I've had people go, oh, okay, Web3. I'm like, hang on. We're not Web3. Like, we're just using a technology here. So we've just buried it now. It just sits
That's good.
underneath.
And look, and we can talk about that for a second, because one of the other areas I wanted to explore is the advantages and disadvantages of being an emerging tech company, even if it's under the bonnet, even if it's not what you're leading with in your value proposition. There's pros and cons to that. So the way I look at it, and tell me if I'm wrong, the savvy investors will be like, oh my God, someone who's trying to do something with blockchain, right? And they'll sort of see through it, and they'll really sort of quiz you on like, okay, cool. But what problem are you solving, or what have you? But then there's a whole bunch of other, let's call them the punter type investor, which is like, oh, good. Buzzword tech, great, let's go. I want to invest in that. I want to be just jumping on the bandwagon. And you look at this guy, the WeWork founder, who like tweeted that he was starting some sort of crypto startup, and he raises $2 billion overnight just because it had crypto and it had this founder in it. So can you share a little bit of the pros and cons? Has it been an advantage or a disadvantage to have any sort of association with Web3 or crypto?
I don't know if it's been an advantage or disadvantage at this early stage. I think it's certainly been a distraction, to be honest.
So
in a lot of conversations that we've had with people, there's been a big movement around that space called regenerative finance, which is any application of blockchain that's trying to solve climate, basically. So there's been a lot of education that needs to happen in that space. So by distraction, I mean, it comes up. We're seen as some sort of experts in that space, but it's such a new technology that no one's really an expert. And we're still, going through the applications. What we knew we needed for what we were building was a digital ledger. And it just made sense to use this technology because it's fully transparent, which is an issue. This is a market built on trust. So you want to have transparency, immutability, all those sort of things. But very quickly, the conversation goes, oh, well, hang on, blockchain, that uses a lot of energy, right? That's bad. And so then you get into this whole conversation. I come from an energy background. So, I don't think energy use is bad. I think the source of energy is very important. Like, it's got to be renewables. We've got to decarbonize and move 100% to clean energy. But suddenly you're in a conversation around something different that's not your business.
Yeah.
And that's a real distraction. And we've been very considerate of that fact. And we can go into it, why we use a proof of stake blockchain, why we're now working with Hashgraph rather than a blockchain, how that facilitates a very efficient use of energy. But it's not what we want to talk about.
Yeah.
What we want to talk about.
It's got nothing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. That's not our product at the end of the day.
Okay, that's really good. That's really powerful. I'll probably just try and sum that up by saying, don't put the cart before the horse. Leave the tech behind the scenes, under the bonnet, and try to avoid the distractions, the conversations, and the rabbit holes that it might lead you down, particularly where it's not relevant to your product, to your core value proposition. Okay, that's really good. Now, I want to touch on something you brought up earlier. Is you realize that the technology is not important to people. You said you made the mistake of talking to some of your customers about the tech. Can you talk to us about how you perhaps tested that, how you realized that, and how you acted on that sort of feedback?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can't tell you how many hundreds of different conversations we've had in this space, and that's across all the different realms of people that have no idea about the technology, people who are very familiar with it, quite passionate about it. We're not ideological in terms of it. We just find a use case for the technology and an application for it. But a lot of it's been around conversations with, early conversations with trying to get to know investors and how they pigeonhole you in that. And we very quickly realized that we need to get our story, and that story continues to evolve, more focused on the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think we're only really now really getting that story straight. And so how we've done that, it's going to pitch nights, it's doing one-on-one calls. We do a weekly networking drinks here in the region for anyone involved in climate, technology, etc. It's having everyone in your team pitching everyone at those sort of meetings. How do you explain what you do in 15 seconds? How does that evolve over time? How do you sharpen that message? You've just got to find every opportunity that you can to test it, with your kids, your family, your dog. It's putting yourself in a situation where you have to explain it, because that repetition is what really allows you to sharpen up your message.
Amazing. And I have also met a few people who they come up with the message, they come up with the story in isolation, like boxed up in their office or in their in their home, wherever they're working from, and quickly start producing product features, websites, brochures, whatever you want to call it, and haven't had all of those customer conversations. So I think you are sort of spot on. And it's very much something that we recommend to so many people, is even before you go to a proper experiment, just get out there and talk to people about it. Get the feedback. The qualitative conversations are so rich, and you're going to be able to see whether people's eyebrows are kind of moving and like, what the hell is he talking about?
Yeah. I'll tell you where we're at the moment is contacts that I know, that I trust, that are working at companies or have businesses that might be interested in the kind of thing that we're doing. It's very unscalable, but making an individualized pitch deck for each of them, like a customer pitch deck. And I change it each time, and I see what works and what doesn't work for different kind of companies and different industries. And that can be from anything from fashion to technology to, manufacturing. And you see what works. You see very quickly which segments of the economy are actually, interested in what you're doing. You see how your message lands differently with different people, how your product might actually serve some people. So everything's such a learning experience in this space. And coming into it with industry knowledge, I thought, I kind of know everything, but it's absolutely untrue. One thing that I lacked certainly was that customer interaction, particularly with smaller businesses. I'd never really done that before, to be honest. It was always kind of this big global thing, multinationals, large corporations,
different buying journey, different buyers, different personas 100%. Through that buying journey.
Yeah. So now I'm just making these pitch decks and I send them out and I try and get feedback, and it takes time. You've got to spend half an hour adapting the deck. Then you've got to write a nice email sort of explaining a little bit what you do, and you adapt that each time. Then you want to follow up with a conversation to get real feedback, and oftentimes I had one back from a friend, just, I just don't get it, So there's a lot to learn in that space as well.
The one thing I would suggest is whenever you're going to do one of these, let's call it an experiment. So you're creating multiple versions of the deck, different ways of communicating, different industries. There's a different variable that you've sort of testing in there. So for example, the same message to different industries. So then, your customer is the variable. The same industry, different messages, then, your value proposition is the variable. So what I would just suggest is whenever you're going to do some activity like that, be very specific about what variable you're testing, and try not to test multiple variables at the same time, because then you don't really know what change led to the result, right? So that's the first thing, is to kind of, if you remember the scientific method in high school, it's just about isolating a variable in your control group and all that. But then the second thing that's quite important is to declare the result that you expect up front. And maybe this is a mental note, but if you could get into the discipline or the habit of writing it down and say, for example, we're going to test this pitch deck with these different industries, and we will consider it a success if, I don't know, they respond with feedback and book the follow-up call. If they, I don't know, they book in the demo, whatever it is, you have to define. And there's a pretty good approach to this. If you look at Strategizer's test card, it basically has 4 different boxes that you have to think about when you're going to run an experiment. So, I believe that people from this industry are more likely to want to engage with me and buy my product. To test that, I will send them a pitch deck where I have tweaked the value proposition in line with their industry. I am correct if they get back to me and book the follow-up call. And you also put a bit of a success criteria in there. It's like, well, at least half of them, at least 30% of them, you're going to deem the whole experiment a success if whatever you decide. And so getting into that habit, first of all, makes you very specific about what variable you're testing, what good looks like. And it gives you something to then start to collect data that over time you're saying, okay, look, I've tried all these different industries, I've tried all these different value propositions, and I have some sort of data to show about it. I find that's pretty powerful, obviously, to refine your pitch, your product, your value proposition, but it's also quite powerful with investors because you can go, now you have data, as opposed to saying, look, we've had lots of conversations, we've sent lots of pitch decks. You just putting a little bit of rigor behind it, and then you're able to, as you kind of map out your buyer's journey, you could start to think about what are all these sort of conversions that I'm measuring. So it's the conversion from initial conversation to pitch deck sent, the conversion from pitch deck sent to follow-up call. Whatever your buyer's journey might be, you start to think about all those different conversions and steps that are in that buyer's journey. And that's how you can start to tell the story of whether your traction is improving, not improving. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's a bit of admin. And look, to be honest, I find a lot of people just don't have the time to do it. So it sounds great in theory. So as I said, you just have to be a little bit realistic about, how we apply these sort of methods. But basically just try, even if you don't make a spreadsheet and you don't go all so scientific about it, it's just about being really clear in your mind what you're testing and what good looks like, and try and somehow, even if you do it retrospectively, it's like, okay, how many emails did I send? How many versions of this deck have I got? And you start to put that into your deck and how you communicate to investors to say, look, this is how we can show progress. We're not just spending time sending decks with no kind of outcome in mind, but this is what we're chasing. This is what we believe to be true. This is what we're learning along the process by sending all these decks out. So anyhow, so look, that's really good. 100% agree with you that particularly in the beginning, having conversations, going to those pitch nights, networking, the repetition definitely helps with the craft. I totally agree that this idea of don't talk about the tech and just lead with customer problems, lead with your understanding of the pain points, what have you. And it's really powerful what you said about how the conversations that you've had have led you to the knowledge about your customer. So that's something I'd like to talk a little bit more about now. Is you have a hypothesis, or you've perhaps already proven this, that you've got your beachhead customer of the small sub 100 hectare farm. And on the other end, you've got your sustainably minded brands. Now, one of the things that I've seen happen with a few climate tech startups is that they are still only attractive, and their value proposition is only really well received with your kind of diehard greenies, early adopters. And it's a pain in the ass because we obviously need these solutions to scale and to move beyond the early adopters. But a lot of these things are still on the fringes of kind of mainstream. Like the markets are still emerging. The people's understanding of the vehicles that they have to do the right thing are still emerging. So have you, I know it's a tough question, but have you got any ideas around how you're going to move beyond your early adopter and beyond your sustainably minded brands? There's a couple of tailwinds that are pushing people to move beyond that market, but have you got any thoughts around, you've got your early stage customers, because you've got the two sides of your business model. Then you've got sort of medium term, there might be some other customers that this starts to become attractive to, and then ultimately long-term world domination. Have you got any thoughts around that, about how you're breaking past your
Yeah,
initial cohort?
yeah, absolutely. And look, we are going for those die-hard brands to start with and businesses because there's less education involved. You know, it's a smoother journey with them. Hopefully, they're already taking those actions. So we're just trying to improve their experience as it is currently. Okay. But there exists this big carbon market. I mean, the carbon market globally is worth about 300 billion. The voluntary market itself is worth about 2 billion now, which is still tiny, right? It's still a very, very small business. And that's largely dominated by these big international corporations buying carbon credits. We are sticking with what's been published for public consultation by the Integrity Council, the voluntary carbon market. And what they've published is some core carbon principles. So those core carbon principles are things that the voluntary carbon market should adhere by to make sure that the credits that are being produced are of a high quality and have a higher level of integrity. As long as we stick by those, even though we're following in this beachhead of companies that don't, necessarily need that level of verification, it allows us to scale in the future. Now, we need to follow those principles, because that's what the market requires today. Like the market, 80% of the market trades on Verra, which is a certification scheme, basically, and a registry that actually issues the credits as long as you adhere with their methodologies. 80%.
It's like the global ERF type thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So ERF being the Emissions Reduction Fund in Australia, Verra is a voluntary global scheme. Yeah, but there's a couple of other ones as well. But they've spent 20 years building up trust in their methodologies. I mean, they're a big incumbent, and we think right for disruption. So as long as we can provide a better customer experience and align with the integrity that they're providing, the level of integrity, we feel we should be able to compete with them. It's hard for an incumbent that's been there for a long time to adapt. We see them trying to, but as a nimble startup, we can try and give customers really what they want. And the one thing in this market that we constantly hear is that people are unhappy with their experience. Whether you're a developer or a buyer, it's a horrible customer experience to try and buy a carbon credit that's been issued through Verra today. It takes you 18 months at minimum just to get registered with them. It costs you $150,000, right? Excluding the tens of thousands of dollars you need to get an auditor out, plus their travel expenses and blah, blah, blah. Plus you've got to spend millions actually developing this project with no assurance that you're going to make it through their certification scheme. I mean, millions, tens of millions of dollars. So there's a lot of risk sitting in there for project developers. On the other side, a business will buy this carbon credit and they may not see it for 6 months. It has to go through this horrible chain that doesn't provide that doesn't allow them to show their customers what they're doing in real time, firstly, but there's no interface for those customers to really understand what that business is doing either. And net zero doesn't really mean much to the average person, to be honest.
Totally.
So we think we can scale by providing a better customer experience focused on a beachhead of companies that would like something like this at the moment. Doesn't really provide scale. It's very, it's small. But if we can build up trust in that system, we can grow following the core carbon principles. I think the other thing is we're working with technology providers. So for example, going back to the blockchain element, but that digital ledger, the governing council of that has very, very large players involved because it's an enterprise digital ledger. So they've got the likes of Boeing, Microsoft, IBM, these sort of guys that are part of that. They're stakeholders within that technology. So that gives us an avenue to work with those big companies and develop what they need as well.
You've reminded me of a point of, your project developer or your brand today, of the two sides of your equation, they might not even know that there's a better way to be doing things, or there might not be a better way available to them, right? And the status quo is just this painful 18-month horrible CX, no interface type experience that you've just described. One of the best ways I've heard of introducing or inserting your product into that type of market is by pointing out the problems with their current alternative. So if you think about, you're old enough to remember the cassette era. So the cassettes were fine until CDs came around, and the CD pointed out how annoying it was to have to flick the cassette in the pencil to rewind it to the other side so it wouldn't use all the batteries in your Walkman. And you had to like fast forward to the other side to listen to your favorite song all over again, right? So that was fine when you had a cassette, but then along comes a CD and you can just skip, track, and put it on repeat if you want. And it was perfect, right? And only by pointing out the problems with the cassette does the CD all of a sudden sort of shine in this whole new light, because people with a cassette perhaps didn't perceive that they had a problem. So that's a good way, I guess, of framing your product and your service, is saying, look how poor and how terrible, and look at all the issues and the pain and that this current experience is causing you. So that's, I get the impression that that's sort of what you're focused on. And the other thing that's super powerful that I just heard that you were saying is you're focused on the customer and you're focused on their problem, right? And you're going to keep evolving your product, your service to solve the problems for that customer. Instead of saying, oh, look, my solution is perfect, let me go and find another customer that this solves a problem for. So by focusing on that, on those customers, on those two sides, and by pointing out the problems with the solutions that they currently have in place, it gives you that opportunity to make your value proposition well received, understood, because people go like, yeah, that does suck. And oh, this guy's on my side. He's sort of solving problems for me. So that's super powerful. So I don't know if you were doing that consciously or subconsciously, but it's a pretty good.
Maybe I can give you a bit of background of that. We set out, like, you know, I've got this background in energy, and we kind of made this, we were going down two streams at once. We wanted to solve a really big problem in climate. That was the main ambition. And, you know, coming from an energy background, decarbonization, maximalist, we've got to decarbonize the grid. There's problems to solve there. There were so many people, good people, focused on those problems, and the energy transition is going to happen anyway. Economically, it makes sense. So there's already a lot of people that have done 10 plus years, great work, grinding it out in there. We saw this opportunity, particularly around natural capital, you know, how you can incentivize investment in natural capital, regeneration, so many problems to unpack. We set out solving one problem within the existing system. We thought, you know, we'll focus on something like the development side, and we'll figure out digital MRV, like how we can take this analog manual process today and digitize it. The thing that we kept on running into is like, there's these massive incumbents, you know, these black boxes. That's how the current market players describe them in the middle, that are slowing the process down. And as someone driven to make a difference because of the climate emergency, we can't afford to have those big monolithic incumbents slowing down this process. And the market's growing year on year, almost 100%. Like, I mean, we need to grow 10 times faster, essentially. And so where we got to is like, well, we need to kind of disrupt this whole market. We need to provide a solution that's focused on both ends as a customer experience, rather than something that's really a roadblock at the moment, because that's what kept on coming back. And we didn't start out there, but that's kind of where we've ended up now.
Awesome. And I think that's a really good space to be in. So because I was asking you, how are you going to move from your early adopter to your more mainstream, right? So you've got these tailwinds of the industry growing, the market growing, the demand growing, but you've also got this fact that you are solving for a customer problem and a customer pain point. And that's the kind of stuff that I guess jumps across different customer cohorts, because as the tailwind is getting more people into this market, they will have the choice. Oh, well, do I go for the clunky experience, or do I go for the, you know, really swish and smooth experience that Katalyst Earth is giving me? So absolutely, I think focusing on experience coupled with the tailwind is the right way the right strategy, I think, to go about, you know, making this a bit more mainstream. So that's cool. Good. But the challenge with that, obviously, is that you are, as you said, trying to solve problems within a very fractured market with a whole bunch of big incumbents, and stitching that together as a lone ranger, as a startup, is hard. So I guess the second problem would be around where do you focus your efforts across that entire experience, because it's massive.
That's been a real headache for, it feels like we've been jumping from one problem to the next problem on both sides. And it's around where you focus. Our strategy, rightly or wrongly, has been build the smallest thing that you can that provides some sort of benefit to a customer. Don't charge them or anything like that. We're bootstrapping, just build something and get some feedback on it, and then iterate and test again on both sides. So we started off one side. We think we got the upstream, the producer side nailed. We thought we understood the problems really well there. We built something that we can start testing with people in that space because we've built up relationships with them. And then we kind of looked and went, well, hang on, we've got this problem of actually providing demand for what we want to create. So then we had to switch down there, and that's where we're currently sitting, is building something for these customers, testing, iterating. And then the next phase is, well, how do you bring them together? And that's this architecture, which is underneath, which we've kind of we understand the technology very well. And that's just where we're starting to get into now, is how do you put them together? The next stage really for us is, we've got a pilot project upstream. We need to digitize that. We need to run through the methodology. We need to go through all the little bits and pieces that need to happen to issue a credit, and we need a buyer. So that's where we're at. And we just do that once. We show some sort of product market fit, we show a need, and then we go out, raise a ton of money, hire a bunch of people, and we go really fast. That's the plan.
Boom. What I would, and I think it's amazing that you've gone about it the way that you have, by, testing, building something, the minimum amount of value that you can deliver on one end of the experience, and then focusing on the other end of the experience. And now you're kind of stitching together different parts of that overall experience. I think that's amazing. Have you considered, or are you currently doing this without building the tech? And what I'm getting at here is, there are ways that you can test that overall experience with smoke and mirrors, without, whether it's a pitch deck, or whether it's a landing page, or whether it's you're doing this kind of concierge approach. Are you thinking that way? Does that kind of come naturally to you guys?
Because it's been so easy to raise capital, there's been a lot of companies that have kind of built in stealth and just come out of nowhere and gone, we've got this fully great product. And I'm sitting there going, are we doing this the right way? Because we are here's a bit smoke and mirrors a little bit. We build something that's basically just a front end, and we say, is this interesting for you? Is this something that you would find useful, that you would want, that your customers might find useful? Is this something that you can play with and kind of give some feedback? We're not building the full architecture, we're not building the full digital product. We are prototyping, beyond, even earlier than prototyping, I would say. And I'm quite fortunate in that I've got a great co-founder, Alex, Israeli tech background. He's built all sorts of amazing things, satellites and telecommunication systems and missile defense, whatever. So he's very used to that process of just build something that's very, very small that you can see if it's going to work.
And look, and that's amazing, right? Because you don't have to convince me that testing something with smoke and mirrors is the right way to go about it. So I would say, if you're worried about some of those coming out of nowhere with a fully fledged built up platform, unless they have been speaking to customers like you have, unless they are really sure that their product is solving a customer need, I would say that they've gone about it the wrong way. Because think about it. Imagine if they haven't had those conversations. Imagine if only now, after they've built this thing, they're trying to find a market for their product. Only now are they going to see, oh, wait a minute, but that actually doesn't solve this 18-month horrible CX thing that you picked up on. And they're very much wedded to the thing that they have built, because they've sunk so much time and effort building that thing. And believe me, once you start building stuff and writing lines of code, it's very hard to ditch that, to move away from that, and to move on to the next thing that you realized was better because of your customer conversation. So look, I don't know what those companies have or haven't done, but just keep that in the back of your mind, is you're going about it through discovering what customers want, and by not wasting a ton of time and resources building tech before you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
So
aware that
totally.
we did build some tech, and that was, for an environmental purpose, so we could show like actually what we're going to be doing. We did this NFT project, but it also allowed us to test what we were doing under the hood. We could actually start digitizing physical assets, and that was part of what we were trying to do at that time. And just want to thank you as well for your support of that project.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. Tell us, for our listeners, what can they do if they want to get involved? How can they help some of these projects that you're looking at?
Sure. So we've partnered with some project developers up here. So these are tree planting organizations that rely on sponsorship to actually regenerate the big scrub. So the big scrub was Australia's largest subtropical rainforest based around the Byron Bay hinterland. And we are raising 50 grand to actually help those companies regenerate the properties. And the reason is that they rely on sponsorship today to actually go and do their great work.
Like land care type sponsorship?
Yeah, those sort of things, WWF sponsorship, but they raise funds from private individuals, from businesses, and they're the typical ones that will go, raise some capital, or raise some sponsorship, because it's philanthropy at the end of the day. And then, give a shout out on Instagram or something to their sponsors.
Okay, so where should people go if they want to chip in?
Yeah, so our website, www.Katalyst Earth, so that's Katalyst with a K, katalyst.earth. And you can go down there, and we've made it really easy for people to actually get involved in this whole—
I can second that. It was easy.
Web3 space. We started out, people need to set up wallets and buy crypto and all that sort of stuff. You don't need to with this. But that's been part of what we've done, as well as learning and iterating and testing how we can make that blockchain experience really easy for people, because it is a nightmare at the moment. If you want to go out and buy one of these NFTs, it's a very long-winded process. We basically take care of all of that stuff in the back end.
Amazing. Mitch, you have been so good to chat through and understand some of your experience going through and building Katalyst Earth. I really enjoyed the conversation with you today. And look, I really encourage all of our listeners to have a look at what Katalyst Earth is doing online and supporting these projects. Mitch, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Leo. Really appreciate it.